life, business, reinvention, and the lessons that outlive us. This is the Dave of the Dead podcast.
Hola a todos. Welcome back to Dave of the Dead. Today's guest is someone who's been shaping culture from inside the biggest brands in the world, long before culture-first marketing was even a thing. I'm talking about Javier Farfan, brand growth advisor and cultural curation expert. Javi has been in the rooms where culture, money, and power collide. MTV, Microsoft, PepsiCo, Verizon. Should I go on? Yes, I will. Walmart, Roc Nation, and now inside the National Football League. He knows what works, he knows what's fake, and he knows how fast relevance disappears if you don't stay sharp and plugged into what's hot in culture on a day-to-day basis. So today we're talking about building real influence, staying dangerous in your craft, and why culture isn't a segment, it's the whole damn operating system. Javier Farfan, my friend and OG colleague, welcome to Dave of the Dead, brother.
Thank you for having me. And definitely we're OGs in the game.
Look at us. Would you look at us? We're holding it down, brother. Thank you for being here. It's really great to have you. I'm excited.
I appreciate it.
So you're my next victim on Dave of the Dead. I sort of loosely explained what's going on here and you kindly accepted. On Dave of the Dead, we talk about life, we talk about business, we talk about reinvention and lessons that outlive us. I might have a few curveballs in there along the way. I'm going to try some new stuff today because it's you. And are you ready for this?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. I'll start with the easy stuff. I want to sort of lay the foundation for the man I'm talking to. I want to hear about your upbringing. I want to hear about where you come from and who created, the man behind the myth. Let's go back to the beginning. Tell me about where you come from and your family and your life.
Yeah, so I'm a native New Yorker, born and raised, which there's not a lot of us. And I think that brings a level of cultural understanding that, we're folks that are born and raised in New York are privileged to. My family comes from Ecuador. They came in the late 60s, early 70s, and landed in Manhattan, but in a very unique part of town. We grew up in Morningside Heights, which is, a couple blocks away from Harlem, but the west side of Harlem, which, means a lot when you think about the construct of New York, just the city itself in Manhattan, where it's predominantly African American, and a bunch of university students from Columbia University, because Columbia really kind of took over that part of the town. And, I think that particular upbringing really gave me a true perspective. I think I was a little not, I didn't feel like connected to anything in a weird way, right? Because, I had all these university students, I had a big Black community next to me, no South Americans at all. So I kind of grew up in this kind of observant kind of like vibe, right? Like just looking at the world and all these unique mixes just kind of hitting me and giving me perspective on what I like and what I don't like. And I think that made me, understand culture in a very unique way. Um, I spent most of my time there. Then around 11 years old, I moved uptown to Inwood, Washington Heights. And there, it was interesting. This was before the influx of the Dominican population to that area. So it was predominantly Irish. And then I saw the inflows happen in the late 80s with all the Dominican population. And that became kind of like the world that I lived in high school going into college. So, a lot of Latinos, a lot of Irish, a lot of Italians. And I went to a Catholic high school, and I was blessed enough to get into a university at the time, and I went to Binghamton University. which is a state school in New York, which is a pretty good state school. And that's kind of where I started really connecting back to my identity versus looking at the world the way I was looking at it. I cared about hanging out, partying, and music, and doing a little drugs here and there. And then I kind of fell into, caring about, what it is to be Latino, what it is to care about the community. I did a ton of stuff during college that really kind of shaped my path when I got out. Do you want me to continue down that path, or
I mean, I got a million questions here, but yeah, thank you for sharing that.
yeah, give me questions, and then I'll fill it in.
I'm here to ask the questions, Javi. I definitely have so many questions for you. So you're at the intersection of all these cultures. Sounds
Yeah,
like your Latinidad was in there, but not that you were rejecting it. You were just surrounded by other cultures. Sort of,
correct.
you said Black, Irish, Dominican, eventually, and then you sort of, I use the term retro acculturated. You found your culture within that. It's no wonder that you obviously understand culture and and the confluence of them and how they intersect. And I think that gave you a really interesting perspective on life. And ultimately, as we'll talk about in your business, were there
Correct.
any particular people in your life who were like huge influences? I know culture, but who were your heroes? Were they from your family? Were they celebrities? Tell me more about that.
You, you know, who are my heroes? I would say, my family had a lot to do with my drive. So my mom was a single mom, and for most of my young age, all the way to my adolescence, I didn't have a brother. My brother came to our lives when I was around 14, going into 15. So I was pretty much, it was just me and my mom. But watching my mom try to survive on her own, you know, um, gave me the drive to work. She put me to work. She had two jobs, so she was working from like 7 in the morning all the way to 10 o'clock at night for like 4 or 5 years straight. So I spent a lot of time alone. Like I was a latchkey kid. We just couldn't afford to have a babysitter, so she's like, get home, lock the door, and just stay in there. And my world was my TV, like was a TV,
Ah, I have heard
and
this. I had my first guest was Evan Shapiro. You might know him from the industry.
yeah,
Also a latchkey kid, also sculpted by culture and television. So interesting how that molded you. What did mom do,
yeah.
by the way? What were her two jobs?
So she, it's funny because it's an interesting story. They were late teenagers, and my grandmother had two kids still that were in Ecuador. So she
Uh-huh.
had to go back to Ecuador, and she left them here at the ages of 16, 17, and 19. I think they were the ages of my mom and her brother and sister. Um, and during that time, there was a plethora of jobs. So they gave them a few dollars and say, go find a job. And she found a job in the bindery business that was all in Canal Street. So Canal Street, what it is now, all those buildings where all the agencies are at and stuff like that. I actually used to go through those floors when my mom worked there, and she used to build all the books for all the banks. So JP Morgan, Citibank, all those kind of like 10K, annual reports, anything when it came to banking was being produced by that world. And she kind of lived that world, for her whole career. So the two jobs, she would go from one bindery to another bindery, working through that. And it was dominated by kind of Italian Americans. So a lot of the friends that I had through my mom were my godfather is Italian. So they were like kind of Italian businessmen, that kind of grew up in New York, and they moved to Jersey or to Brooklyn, and they had all these businesses. All those businesses by the 80s and 90s could not afford to be in that area, and they moved to Jersey. So towards the end of my mom's career, we started seeing her go more to Jersey, like the Hoboken area. There was factories there, and then that whole business kind of died out. So that's what she did. So when I was home, my mom became friendly with like the community. The community kind of took care of me in the sense, like when she had to leave early, she would take me to the diner and say, "Sit here until you go to school." I became friendly with the folks there. Then, they would wait until I get to school, do that thing, and then, we used to buy pizza or Chinese food from the same place, or get the laundry from the same place, the dry cleaners, and then we became friendly with the dry cleaner. That was my first job. She was just like, "You should be working in the back, help clean the place and make some money." So by 12 years old, I was working.
Wow.
And I
So you
ne-
were hustling
and I
from a
never
very young age.
and I've been working since. I've never not had a job since
I
that
I
age.
know. We're gonna unpack that. Okay, I have to
Yeah.
point out when you said I had an Italian godfather, I had to say, "Buonasera, buonasera." Vito Corleone, or what was his name? I have to know his name.
Larry. I can't
What?
remember his last. Yeah,
We're just gonna call
Larry
him Larry
something.
Corleone. It's Larry
It's
Corleone.
like,
Let me just tell you.
but let me tell you, that world really lived, like I was around that world a little bit. They kind of ran that business.
Oh, I bet. We won't unpack
Yeah,
that. I wanna protect the innocent.
exactly.
And then is there any coincidence that your mom was creating these books related to banking? Because really one of your first jobs, if not your first, was JP Morgan Chase, right? Is that
Yeah,
any
it,
correlation or that's a coincidence?
that's a coincidence. That one's a coincidence.
Okay,
Going to Columbia wasn't a coincidence, and just being in that neighborhood wasn't a coincidence because I kind of eyed that school since I was very young.
right on. Okay, so we're gonna get into your business life, and there's so much to talk about here. I literally have to like almost limit it. I'm gonna go literally like company by company here. But the bottom line is you've seen how the biggest machines in business really run from the inside. And
Yeah,
at every turn, you've had to literally reinvent yourself. And every big move required you to like relearn a new industry, rebuild credibility, prove value repeatedly. And ultimately, what you are known for, your calling card, if I were to give you a tagline, is translating culture into new contexts across these categories. Most executives avoid all of this reinvention. You leaned into it, and that's what's kept you relevant while others have plateaued or disappeared. And you're beyond relevant. People literally look to you to see like what's hot, what's at the tip of the spear. I know you to be that guy, and obviously the industry does as well. So I want to unpack like what's worked, what's broken, maybe what some leaders who shall remain nameless, what they maybe aren't getting in each of these industries. And I want to point out Javi wears many hats. So I frankly was like, oh, you're working for the NFL now. Yes, he is the global brand and consumer marketing consultant to the NFL, but he's also the owner and founder of what's called J Wolf Advisors. And he has all these different clients. So I'm literally going to go, company by company here. But I have to say, and we got to just spend at least a few minutes on this. We're less than a week out from the Super Bowl. I don't know what you could even tell me here. Okay. But trying to think how to frame it. So, I mean, I'll actually frame it around a post that I did around Bad Bunny appearing at the Super Bowl. And it meant so much, obviously, to so many people. And that's a given. But my post was yes, it's about leaning into culture, but ultimately, the halftime show was a growth strategy for the NFL and leaning into the fact that, frankly, 100% of population growth here in the US is multicultural. And of course, the NFL is now a global brand. It's no secret they're playing games around the world. So answer however you'd like, but what is sort of the peek behind the curtain strategically as to this Bad Bunny, mega event? What can you share about that?
um, what can I share about that? Like I think that Bad Bunny is just one piece to a bigger puzzle that's being, you know, created from a strategic perspective. I think you kind of hit it, when you said it's a growth strategy for us as we're thinking about, you know, where we need to continue to grow, right? 75% of the population in the United States loves American football, NFL. So
Right.
25% is probably audiences that have some type of appeal to it, but haven't really grown up with the sport. So think about it, like it's probably like young people, right? Because
Yep.
they're being introduced to it. It's Latinos, it's women. So it's kind of like the fringe of that population. So we're doing a lot of strategies to kind of focus on that. But
Yep.
then where do we go from there? And where we go from there is the world, right? And so as you're thinking about just overall the next you know 10 years, you start seeing that specific change, that pivot that's happening, right? So um eh, us being part of the Olympics, right, for the first time in 2028 with flag, it's a way to open up the sport to be more inclusive, bring women involved, bring young people involved, and really start showing that skill level outside of the traditional way that we see football. Seeing where the growth has been happening for the past 20 years. The second largest population that loves football is Mexico, right? We've been
Really?
broadcasting it there. Yes. 39 million fans we have in Mexico because we've been broadcasting football there for the past 20 plus years, and we've been having games there for the past 15 years. We haven't had it for the past couple of years, but we're going to do it again in 2026. So
Yeah.
we saw and we understand what the blueprint is to that, and now we're accelerating that blueprint across places that we could see we could win. Brazil being one of them, Spain being another. We just said that we're going to play in France, we're going to play in Australia, and we're looking to grow that to 15 to 16 games, every season. That means one game a week somewhere else in the world. We're already going to do 9 this year outside of the United States. So that's one every other week, technically. So it just shows kind of the path forward. So as you look at that, right, and you look at that pathway
Yeah.
that I've been privileged enough to be a part of for the past 6 seasons, now going into my seventh season, you start understanding that as we think about what NFL means as a brand, as an entertainment entity, we need to start thinking about, you know, the people and the brands and the artists and the celebrities that we associate with have that breath also. And there's no one else
There you go.
outside of this
That's
world.
the answer. He's the biggest global superstar, and given that palette, who else would you feature? And there happens to be a lot of cultural resonance, of course, inside the US. And it seemed like this big statement, which it was, certainly for him it was as an artist, but for you as an organization, it's about one thing: growth and speaking to a global audience and other
Exactly.
audiences who you're looking to expand. To me, that's
But
just good business, right?
yeah, and but yeah, exactly. But let's not get it twisted, right? Like, this is not, they see me as the Latino, they see Marissa as the Latino, that we're making those decisions. No, we influence those decisions. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the halftime show, that mandate was given by Roger to Jay-Z and Roc Nation, right? So that room is extremely small in where those decisions are made on who is in that halftime show. And then it kind of trickles down. Of course, it's influenced by this overall strategy, but at the end of the day, Roger, the NFL, I guess the football mastermind, right? Because he understands football, and then the cultural mastermind, which is Jay-Z, sitting together and say, okay, what are we going to do that's actually going to have a significant impact as we think about our strategy, and who's actually culturally relevant, right? And it just happened
Yeah.
to be that Bad Bunny was making a lot of noise during that time, and the impact that he was having with the announcement of the residency program when those decisions were being made.
This is so cool, Javi. I'm having a visual. I realize you're not in every meeting with Roger and Jay-Z, but is there ever like you, Marissa Solis, shout out, by the way, from the NFL, Jay-Z, Roger Goodell? Are you ever sitting at a conference room talking to everyone at once? That's what I'm visualizing. Like, how involved are you in that?
Mm, no, those meetings are,
Yeah.
very small rooms, and that's probably just Roger, Jay, and those folks. There's times when a broader group of Roc Nation people, broader group of event people at the NFL
Right.
are sitting together because they're designing that, and we consult that, but they do their thing. Everybody kind
Yeah.
of does their thing. What I could say is that we do have conversations from a NFL perspective with Roger because he needs to see that. And in my past life, I've had meetings with Jay-Z when I was at Roc Nation doing titles. So that's been a different side of my life, but I've never had them together. But I have direct connections to those two different worlds just from my experience in my career.
Okay. Last NFL question. Were you like a big sports fan to begin with, or was this like, oh gosh, I got to pivot and apply my skills to this world of football? Like, how did
Dude,
you do this?
sports, I had no clue.
No clue.
No clue. No
Literally.
clue. Literally. My son now is a sports avid and he could tell you everything about every player in the NFL, in soccer. I played baseball probably 2 summers and I was horrible, and that's the extent of my sports career. I've been blessed enough to have careers in marketing and entertainment. So my first official football game was a Super Bowl, but I was Microsoft at the time and we were potentially going to sponsor it. So they sent me to actually go see a game. And then I did a bunch of halftimes when I kind of ran music and entertainment for PepsiCo. So I got exposed to that from a brand perspective. And then this was my real entry into understanding the sport, have a real appreciation for what the sport is about and the athletes within it, and just kind of understanding how the sports business works.
So interesting. So if I'm
Yeah.
reading the tea leaves here, I want to talk a little bit about Roc Nation and working with Jay-Z and Tidal. That was clearly an on-ramp to this position because they work so hand in hand with the NFL. Is that accurate?
That's very accurate. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I was privileged enough to spend a few years there, kind of supporting them as they were growing their title business, and I was, heading up the marketing group for them regarding that, and that took a lot of different forms. But you know, Jay's a smart dude, and he understood where the music business was going, and he understood that streaming was kind of the landscape that was going to be what it is now, and a lot of the conversation was like, look, if I even have 5% of the market, I'm winning because it's billions of dollars. So he wasn't trying to compete like everybody's like, oh, you're not Apple, you're not Spotify.
Right.
He's like, nah, I just need a seat at the table and I need to grow with the market cap of that business, and we'll all be eating well. And he was actually right in doing that. The amazing thing, if people really understand that business, he actually went and found a company. If it wasn't Poland, it was Norway. It was one of those two countries where it was the competitor to Spotify that wasn't doing that well, and he basically bought it for almost nothing and then basically put a new cultural face to it, right? Because those guys are into kind of dance music, electronic music, and he put his face to that in the sense of his perspective, the kind of what pop culture was at that time, and with all its relationships, and was able to increase that value and then sell it off to Square, right? But the smart thing in him hiring me, he hired me, of course, because I could do the work, but more he understood that the streaming business was connected to the telecom business and offerings were important. So I helped with his deal with Sprint to get an initial investment into it and then put it into, kind of what some of the offerings would be for Sprint because I came from Verizon. So he was
Oh,
like,
I
oh,
know.
this guy.
Now
So he
I'm
understood that.
seeing how these dots connected, brother. So
Exactly.
he kind of, I call it, I joke, he kind of We Are the World title, right? He brought all these other celebrities, if I'm remembering correctly. Is that right? That was
Correct.
the strategy? Yeah.
Yeah, he basically to create credibility for the actual platform very quickly was able to align himself to all these celebrities, had them investing it, but also kind of showcase that this is the artist platform. Think about when that was done before in the entertainment business. Back in the days when film started and United Artists was created by Charlie Chaplin, same strategy, right? As to compete with the big majors, they created kind of United Artists to show that is the artist platform and gave better deals than the traditional models that were out there at that time, which
Got it.
helped influence the deals that are now happening that are a little bit better, more artist centric. They're still not great, but there was a policy challenge that he was pushing at the same time.
Yeah. Any final word on Jay-Z and having access to that individual? I mean, what an incredible opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, look, the opportunity is not Jay, is a figurehead and he shows up when he needs to show up. It's really the organization that he built around himself with folks like Jay Brown, Jana, and Desiree Perez. Those are the operators of that business and keeping to brand and learning from them, learning how to kind of balance the idea of culture, entertainment, and business without losing that core was instrumental to me in understanding, how to maneuver in those two places, and what
Yeah,
I wanted to be and what I didn't want to be as a practitioner of that.
got it. Now, again, triangulating here. So the Sprint was a big part of what you did with Tidal. So was Verizon again your on ramp into the relationship with Roc Nation, or is that a coincidence? Like I see how
No,
just you took your experience and you just kept plugging it into the next thing and the next thing. It's interesting.
yeah, honestly, that they knew of me already prior to me being at Verizon because I did deals with them when I was at PepsiCo doing music and entertainment. So when I needed to do talent deals with football players, baseball players, musicians, Roc Nation was always a place I would go, and I became friendly with that team and understanding how those things and did some deals with Desiree, who when I went over to Tidal was really the operator of Tidal. So I worked with her directly. So I already had that rapport with them. I went over to Verizon. It just happened to be like my resume helped kind of where they were going. They never told me where they were going. They were like, "Oh, Haas, you could do this. You could run this music thing. You know music. You came from Microsoft. You have the Zoom streaming service kind of understanding of how that business model works. That could be helpful." I didn't know as all that was happening, they were already having the business development conversations with Sprint. So in that, you know, I became somewhat of a supporting character in that journey of raising capital, creating that strategic relationship because I understood the telecom business at that point. But they probably knew that. They were like, "Oh, this guy knows Verizon. This guy probably could help us understand that better." They
Yeah,
just
I
weren't
can really
forthcoming
see.
at that time.
I could see how it
At
all
that
came
time,
together. Now,
exactly.
so you weren't when you worked at Verizon, you were again, you came in more as a culture specialist. What there was no telecom experience prior to Verizon?
No, I
No.
mean, no, I mean, you know what? Luck has always been by my side, and you know, I think I'm a smart guy. So, when people talk to me, they understand that I understand their business. I think a combination of a little bit of my swagger plus an understanding of just business as a whole and what drives business helps me land these jobs. And that particular job, I was vice president of strategy.
Mhm,
I came in at the time when they were doing a significant change in leadership and they were doing a significant change in how that organization should be managed moving forward, especially um, as kind of what we were seeing the evolution of what bios and kind of the cable business was starting to happen through the cord cutters. We started to see, a new generation of folks coming in, wanting cell phones. They were like, well, we want to centralize all those businesses into one centralized marketing organization that
mhm,
really looked at not just, the business to business, the cable business, and the phone all at one place. And they brought in a new leader called Diego Scotti, who now is the CMO of, I think, PayPal, but prior to that, he was heading up J. Crew and Amex, and he really wanted a new leadership team there that actually had the cachet of doing, kind of more engaging, initiatives that are not traditional in the way telecom was doing stuff, and could bring a little new energy into the business. And they wanted somebody who understood like kind of digital in a really strategic way. So I went through a lot of interviews and I got that gig coming right out of PepsiCo. I was offered it up, and it was an amazing experience, but not my cup of tea. It wasn't kind of the organization that I wanted, and I went through a transition in life. Um,
What happened?
with I lost my wife during that time, a year before that.
Oh,
So yeah, so that
okay.
kind of like, I was just like, I need a new change. This is probably a great opportunity for me, and I probably jumped at it without thinking too much of how, I guess my career trajectory was taking me. Wasn't probably the right fit of where I needed to go. But look, I learned again what I didn't want to do and what I did want to do. Right. So I spent 2 years there, and what I realized very quickly is still a telecom business. You know what I'm saying? So the things that I really enjoyed to do, I wasn't able to do anymore because, I was running, I think at the time I had like a $300 million budget, running an organization of around 50 people. At that level, you're a policymaker and you're really working in a different kind of mindset. You're not actually doing things as much anymore. You're really kind of setting policy and trying to drive that type of thinking. And a lot of the decisions are making on the type of capital that I have to invest was done by, agencies that are trying to find performance more than engagement, right? And then also there's a lot of work that happens below the line, especially when it comes to retail and how to really activate that retail. But from a strategy perspective, they were looking at figuring out how to find different business models to really go after different types of consumers. And that's when this idea of growth audience started to kind of happen. So like, how do we get more young people on the service? How do we get, kind of like the more affluent customer in to do stuff? And how do you create products and offerings in that set? So I had the privilege to work with like McKinsey and RGA to come up with new businesses that could help kind of grow the revenue from a different perspective than what they're traditionally doing. And some of them
Yeah,
failed, and some of them actually succeeded.
sure. What a pedigree you have, though. What an experience. And I can see, knowing you as I do, if it's too corporate, too macro, I could see why a guy like you, that'd be tough. That'd be tough. You'd learn, you'd add
Yeah,
value, but it's not a long-term thing. Yeah.
nah, not at all. Even though the money was amazing.
I bet it was.
Mhm.
Uh, that's really cool, Javi. Thank you for sharing that. So what preceded Verizon was PepsiCo. I feel like actually I'm forgetting, I knew you before PepsiCo. You worked at PepsiCo with the legendary Frank Cooper, who I know is a bit of a mentor to you, and Frank Cooper of, gosh, CMO of many things, but right now the CMO of Visa. Tell me about
Yeah.
that experience. What did you learn at PepsiCo and building brand and scaling, thinking globally? Frank is known for thinking humongous, right? He's a huge thinker. And what was that like there, and how did that influence the rest of your career?
I mean, Frank is a blessing to me. He's a great human being, and a great leader with a lot of vision. So it was interesting because I think that particular gig I actually developed as an executive. Like I didn't know what I didn't know, right? I got that gig coming out of Microsoft. I knew Frank from before. We met a couple of times. We had long conversations, and then he offered me that gig. And he threw me in like, figure it out, and you know, working at a CPG company and working for a company like PepsiCo, it really develops your business acumen. the blessing that I had is that I was a business consultant prior to that. So a lot of the skill sets that I learned early in my career, I had to apply them to learn the business quickly, right? Because I didn't understand the CPG
Yeah.
business. I didn't understand, the share swings and how small they can be, but how impactful they can work. How, you need to look at kind of the go-to-market strategy much more aggressively as you're thinking about the broader brand strategy. And then how do you really develop a brand strategy that people can actually connect to and really advocate that throughout, the year, so people can actually see an impact in sales, right? You can do a lot of stuff, but that doesn't impact sales. So learning all that stuff within that year was tough, like that first year. But, it developed me into just a beast of a marketer, to be honest with you. And I understand, what these CMOs are thinking about, how to think through that, how to understand the organizational challenges that you have versus, how do you apply that to actually create great creative and marketing. And I did a lot of stuff that failed, but I did a lot of stuff that actually had some impact. And the beautiful thing working under someone like Frank Cooper is that he allowed you to have a point of view, and he allowed you to play with that. You know what I'm saying? It had to make business sense, but he never said no, right? So I tested a ton of stuff there. And in my tenure there, I started doing multicultural, then I started in a creator innovation group, and then I went into doing music and entertainment. So my team broadened, and I got to work with the best of the best, with folks like, Richie Cruz, Marissa Solis, Bozoma St. John, Jamal Henderson, Stephanie Shannon. Like, there's a ton of people that I work with that now are rock stars in their own right, and I got to work with a pedigree of like amazing marketers that sharpen their skill through that school that we call PepsiCo.
Yeah, I can see how this segued into everything else you've done. I forgot, right? Marissa is ex PepsiCo, and
Yep,
PepsiCo, they used to do the Super Bowl halftime, right? Did you
of
touch that when
course.
you were there? That was the
Yeah,
Beyonce, that was
that
Frank,
that
right? And you.
yeah, that was Frank and me. So basically, Frank did the deals, and then I would activate them, and then Bozema was on my team, so I had different leads, and she was the lead for that stuff. So that was Katy Perry, Bruno Mars, Coldplay, Beyonce. I forgot who. So, I mean,
Yeah,
I think that was my era. That was my era. There's probably one
yeah.
I'm missing there that I can't remember, but yeah, I was involved with all that stuff.
The list goes on. Um,
Yeah.
and if that's not enough, and there's so much more I want to get to, can we briefly touch upon the fact that I met you when you worked at MTV, or, the parent
Yeah,
company, I
MTV.
guess. But were you MTV
Viacom, now
Tres?
Paramount.
Viacom, now Paramount. Were you MTV Tres exclusively, or did you touch MTV proper? I forget.
Mhm. Yeah, so it's the funny story is, it all goes back to a decision I made when I was in college, in grad school actually. So while I got into a PhD program at Columbia University after undergrad. I was gonna be like a professor, or some type of psychology scientist. I was thinking I was getting it in educational policy. I got a full ride to go. And as I was doing that, this goes back to Viacom and to
Yeah,
Frank. As I was doing that job, or going to school full time, um, and my wife at the time pushed me to like, hey, you should get your PhD. You got in, blah blah blah. So she was kind of pushing. I was doing it, but I hated it. I hated it.
mhm,
Um, but I felt like I had to, because I'm in Columbia University. Like, it's the school that I dreamed of going because I was a little kid walking amongst all those students every day in the morning.
right.
So, um, a friend of mine started a hip hop magazine, and so I used to go just to hang out with them. And there was a
What's it
group of
called?
friends.
What's the magazine?
Stress
Oh,
magazine.
Stress. Yeah, yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah. So I used to go and hang out with them while I was going to grad school. And then little by little, I started taking responsibility around it. Oh, why don't you do this promotion? Oh, help us go get money from Jay-Z's camp because they're going to pay for the front cover. So I interacted with that Roc Nation. It was Rockefeller at that time, at that time when I was a youngin, picking up
Uh-huh.
money to do this exchange that we were doing about him being on the front cover of that magazine. So all of that became like, oh, I love this. I don't like what I'm doing at school, but I have to because this is what my family tells me to do because this is going to get us out of poverty or whatever. I wasn't in poverty, but we were still working class people. So I was able to convince the department to switch me and get me into a master's program, which I got a master's from Columbia in organizational psychology, which a lot of the credits that I was doing at the time kind of were able to come over. And then I was able to work at Stress while I was doing that. And the Stress magazine became an offset. We created a .com offset called Latin Flavor that we actually sold.
Tony Martinez
Exact.
and Adam Kidron, and I forget who
Yes,
else. Yeah.
exactly. So I started helping them, and they sold that to Frank Cooper when he was at UBO.
Oh, Frank was UBO.
Yes, and that's how I made the connection to all of those. And then while that whole thing happened, Stress Magazine went down in the sense that they didn't really
Yeah.
create a proper business model. Um, Ket went to Mark Echo to help start Complex to design. So a lot of the fundamental designers went over to support Complex. Latin Flavor kept on doing it until it died out because the
Yeah.
crash of the .com crash. The only thing I had in place was my degree and a bunch of magazines, and I got into after school. I went to work as a consultant to Accenture, working in the media entertainment practice because I sold in the idea that I could be a consultant in media entertainment. So my first gig as a consultant was to actually integrate a part of the Viacom business, Simon Schuster, into the Pearson publishing business. So I was doing actual consulting strategy work for the first couple of years. Um, and while I was doing that, I was like, this is still not what I want to do. I'm still in entertainment, but it's not what I want to do. I want to actually be a practitioner, a marketer within that. Um, I actually decided to to get an MBA in marketing. I was like, okay, the only
Huh.
way I'm going to get in is, and I got into an executive MBA program. I got into the MBA program through I forgot the name of the program. They were going to give me a full ride. And at that time, we lost all the entertainment business at Accenture. My client was JP Morgan, and then they offered me a gig to work there full time and pay for my executive MBA because they knew I was getting my MBA. So I got a free ride to go to NYU. I got to work at JP Morgan for 3 years. And when I came out, I used that magazine to actually get a job at Viacom. I actually went to every CEO, went to their door. Now I went to all these like networking stuff, and I met Herb Scannell, and I was like, "Here's what I created. Here's what I could
Herb
do."
Scannell. For our listeners who don't know who Herb Scannell is, he is half Puerto Rican, half Irish, and he was the president of Nickelodeon and largely behind Dora the Explorer, among other things, and another OG, I guess, and a mentor to Javi, and great guy.
Yeah, so he gave me my first job as director of business development, working for a guy called Jeff Dunn, and I started
Okay.
working on small programs. So one of the programs was, how do you create a business model around Diego? How do you bring UFC to Viacom and monetize it? How do you open up the telecom business? How do you create a business around video games? So all that stuff happened. And then one of the projects was, how do you create a new channel for the Latino? So I was part of the core group that started thinking about all these Latin channels that we had were just straight up like music video channels. We were
Yep.
like, we should probably combine them and create a different type of offering, and that's where the concept of MTV Tres came out,
So
and that's
interesting.
how we met.
Yeah, that's when we met. Shout out to Jose Tian. I feel like that was his name. Is that the
Yes,
gentleman?
he
And then
was.
Lucia Ballas Trainer.
Yep.
And we're doing all the shout. Lily Newmeyer, I think, touched that as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
these are the
That was the
OGs.
core team.
Yeah.
Those are the guys who started it. I was the young marketing buck who was like, "Yo, Haas, create integration decks, create a brand deck, all that stuff." So I started working on that type of stuff.
And to bring it full circle, Hav, I'm 99% sure you bought an ad in my then college and high school magazine called Ay Caramba You and
That's how
MTV
we met.
Thresh. That's
That's
how
it.
we
That's
met.
it. Okay.
Yeah.
I started seeing your magazine. They were like, this is probably a place we should be advertising.
Thank you for that, brother. And it's so funny how all of us, like if you're of our generation, it all goes back to magazines, right? There was Urban
That was
Latino, there was
that's social
Stress,
media. That was the
Paper
social media of the time.
Magazine, no social media.
Yeah.
Ay Caramba,
Yeah.
Complex came out of that. All
Yeah.
of those magazines, a lot of the people who are in my inner circle I met from that era. I mean, I want to cover off a bunch of other things, but just to shout out a few more. So Javi also worked at Microsoft. Javi also consults to Walmart. He touches Complex. What am I leaving out? I mean, it's endless how you have navigated this. I'm just going to call you the cultural oracle. That's what you are, my friend. Are there
I'd appreciate
are
that.
there any, is that the main thing? Like it just to me it just goes when I think of you again, it's where I started. It goes back to culture, sports, music, retail, tech, finance, media. What patterns repeat? It's really how culture threads all of that. And you're the person, you're almost like the Swiss Army knife of culture, and you touch all these different areas. It's just so interesting to see. It's very clear to me now how you've been so successful at what you do. Did I
Yeah.
summarize it well? I mean, yeah.
I would say you have, what I've been doing more recently is just providing perspective on how to activate against it, right? Because everybody talks a good talk and talks about culture and the impact, but how do you really bring it to fruition and how do you actually
Yeah.
apply it to the business of whatever business is the challenge, right? So, and every, not every, nothing fits the same. The organizations are all very different. So what I recommended to Verizon was a very different application that I recommended to PepsiCo as I consult with Walmart. It's a very different conversation as I talk to NFL. They have different business models. They have different revenue models. They have different strategic goals. And understanding that and then helping them figure out how to apply culture in that is an important part, especially where the cultural context of that business is important and where your competition is.
Right. Right. Absolutely. So also part of your reinvention, and you were lucky enough to go to, as you said, NYU and Columbia. Did you say Binghamton too? You've gone everywhere.
And big,
But many people do not know. I didn't know this until you told me, and I really dug into it. You are actually a professor of practice. I want to understand what that is at the
yeah,
Newhouse School of Communication at Syracuse. You are, I think, currently still a professor of marketing at Seton Hall, or you were. Like, so you're
I
obviously
am.
passing. I did my homework. So you're obviously passing this along, right? I'll go off on a little bit of a tangent. So I was listening to my favorite podcast. It's called Founders. It's this guy, David
Mm.
Senra, and he was interviewing Jimmy Iovine, who, let me guess, you probably know him. You
I
know
don't
everybody.
know Jimmy, but I
Oh,
know
you
of
don't know
him,
Jim?
but I don't know him.
No, he's now with Complex. He's doing his thing. But he
Yeah, yeah,
started a school and he was like, look, I come from the streets and people don't know how to put all these pieces together. I just know what I know. I know what works. I know culture. So it's very interesting to have someone like you teaching the youth of today, about everything you know. Do you teach them about how these things converge? Is it, you obviously have a curriculum. Like, I would love to have a professor like you, basically. Like, tell me about this experience.
yeah. So the funny thing is, education. Again, remember, I was getting my PhD in educational policy, so I think I always had a desire to be in a classroom in some capacity. So when
Yeah.
I was in Binghamton, I started a mentoring nonprofit organization called Jump Nation, which still exists. It's 30 years in existence at Syracuse
Wow.
and NYU. It's crazy to me that and we've impacted around 20,000 kids already, and to drive them to go to college from inner city. So I created that due to an experience that I had, from the kids in my neighborhood not being able to be well off or have the mentorship to actually go to college. So, and then a couple of my friends passed away in that process just due to being in the streets. So I said, I want to give back in some way because this is the reason I'm here. And so I had like that rally call, and I had people, a lot of administration really kind of support me through that process. So we started that nonprofit, it's still in existence, which is crazy to me.
Ah,
Out of the core of people that started that, my homie Jill, she's now a judge in Colorado. Another friend of mine, she was, the head of HUD for Biden. Her name is Elizabeth De Leon. So we all kind of became what we became in that. And one of the other persons that I was with was a teacher for 10 years and then decided to start a school, but she had to apply to during the Bloomberg era to actually get the funding for it because he had this program, and I helped her develop that school. So now I also helped start a school. It's called the Urban Assembly New School of Business for Young Women. It's in Wall Street. So that has been in existence now, I think, 20 years. So I always wanted to give back in that perspective. So I've been part of that journey. And then after Verizon, I realized that I wanted to continue to be relevant. And I think I cannot be relevant anymore by being a practitioner because I'm
right.
an old person now. I can't be out there trying to be young anymore. So I was like, let me be around young people. And that's kind of my initiative to do that. And my first full-time professorship was at Seton Hall University. And I was in the business school. I didn't know what I was doing. But what I decided to develop my curriculum around is kind of a lab model, and which I think is now more relevant than ever before. And I really kind of put three things into my class. I put, lectures, which kind of go back to some theory.
Okay.
The second piece is actually like a practicum. So they actually do work for me. So I put them to work. Like if I have a client, I say, hey, here's a brief, give me a perspective of how you would tackle that. I'll give them the tools to do that, and they would have to come up with marketing strategies, marketing plans, and then I have guest speakers. So it's always kind of like that lab model where I bring people to give them a perspective on how the industry works. I give them some theory, and then I give them actually cases that are real to me. And then out of that, I always pick out kids that are great, and they become my working staff. So some of the people actually work with
Really?
me now. Yeah, exactly.
Right now.
Um, yeah, yeah, yeah. So,
Amazing.
and then in Syracuse, I got an offer to actually become a full-time professor, but I would have to move to Syracuse, and that wasn't my cup of tea at that moment in time. So they told me, hey, you can be a professor of practice and teach classes at our New York center. So they
Ah,
bring
that's what
around
that
a
means.
hundred kids. Yeah, they bring students here, like 100 of them a semester, and then I teach, like topics in production, media innovation, or influencer marketing as kind of my core classes, and I kind of take that similar approach. And it becomes easy for me because everybody's in New York. So, like last week, I had a former student of mine. She's now a manager at UTA. She came in and spoke for me while I was at Super Bowl. And this week I actually, came in and kind of gave my perspective on, where AI is taking kind of live production. And then next week I'm bringing the CMO of Paramount to come speak to them. So I constantly have like a flow of people coming in and actually giving them perspective of what the industry is while I give them case studies. I always put them I say, you're going to become an agency or you're going to be a production house. Figure out how you work together. You're going to produce things for me, at least one or two things, before the semester's over.
So cool. Like I said, I would have loved to have a professor like you.
Yeah. And
That's
you know what? I
amazing.
learned from them.
Yeah.
I learned from
Oh, of
them. Like
course.
they put me onto heated rivalry. I was not aware about the impact that heated rivalry had. And, I should, but, young people are the ones keeping me relevant in that way.
No doubt. Okay. Well, we're going to move towards wrapping up. We're at the last segment, if you will. This is where I'm reinventing my podcast about reinvention. This is the lessons that outlive us. And there's a book, it's called Excellent Advice for Living Wisdom I Wish I'd Known Earlier, kind of relevant for this section. The author is Kevin Kelly. And again, I found out about this book listening to Founders. So it's
Mm.
all these sorts of life rules. I'll go through like 2 or 3 of them here. But what hit me is how many of them actually map to your career. And so I want to pressure test a few of them with you in the real world and just get some feedback from you. So this person, I want to say when he turned like in his mid 60s, he started writing all these things down. There's literally hundreds of these. So here's a few. Play long-term games with long-term people. So Javi, you've been relevant for decades. How intentional were you about surrounding yourself with long-term people?
You know, I was not too intentional in the beginning of my career. I've become more intentional now. And It definitely has helped my career for sure. Um, because you know, it's a referral at the end of the day. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, this is somebody that you probably should know. You should talk to. He has a good perspective, or he may be able to do that work. And honestly, that has helped me land things as opposed to me going out to pitch and try to go after new business. It's been the relationships that have continued to keep me relevant and in places that I want to be, right? I've been very intentional now about kind of the industries that I think are important that are really going to have impact in the future and kind of putting myself in those places and finding people that I feel comfortable with. I also want to be around people that I like. Me going after anybody is not like it has to be like-minded folks for me to continue that relationship.
Absolutely. Yeah, building on that,
Yeah,
another one here. Trust compounds faster than talent. It's what you're saying. Being with people who
correct.
trust you and you trust them, and you've stayed in these high trust rooms, literally at the highest level of these major corporations. So you've kind of
Makes sense.
spoken to that one. I'll give you one more, and then we'll move towards wrapping up. So this one, you only need to be 10% better to win. So what tiny edge separates greatness or great campaigns from forgettable ones in your mind? Where do brands waste energy? Where should they double down? Any thoughts on that, marketing wise?
Yeah, I would say don't lose the creative edge that you and your team has. I feel that sometimes what I've noticed is analysis to paralysis. I think that's kind of the term. Like
Yeah.
people overanalyze the numbers and try to be as risk averse, and then they whittle down initiatives or campaigns or creative ideas. I think, you know, I think the most successful ones have a little bit of rigor, but that creative spirit and that risk is the one that drives it to the core. Because if you actually have some strategic grounding, but have a beautiful creative idea that you can actually deploy, is the ones that I see win, right? Like, let's talk about the Bad Bunny piece, right? You know, that was a strategic initiative, but we gave the 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 creative control to him and Roc Nation to develop that beauty that was created, right? It's the same thing. Like, how do you and but we could have whittled it down. We could have, put boundaries against it due to the political climate or what we think we needed to hear, but we allow it to kind of become what it needs to become. And I've seen the greatest ideas, especially in the NFL, like, is when we allow the creatives to breathe a little bit.
Right on. Thank you for sharing that. All right. So 2 more. We're going to end on these. So when people say the name Javier Farfan years from now, what do you hope they remember first?
I would say I would love them to think of innovation within the cultural space and continuing to push the boundaries on innovation. And I would say is someone who really cared about the future and really passing on the learnings and really create, the next breed of innovators within the cultural space. That's what I care about. Like, I want to see an army of us, right? Dave, when we were young, we were bright-eyed, we were like gonna take over the world. I want hundreds of us out there doing the same thing and pushing that and becoming billionaires from it. And if I could have a little bit of that impact in the world, then I've succeeded.
I love that, Javi. I feel like there's still time. We could still be billionaires. We got some gas in the
Yeah,
tank.
yeah. I want to be a billionaire, so yeah, I'm
I know
totally
you
down for
do.
that. But I'm talking about I want hundreds of them out there so we could all feed from it.
True that. True that. All right. So people have, this is an interesting question. Not sure if you've ever thought of this. I know, my song, gotten some different answers. One day we're all going to have a funeral and our friends and family are going to be there. And in your case, there's going to be music playing for sure. What song is playing at your funeral and why? It could be English, Spanish, more than one song. What song embodies your life? Do you have one?
Oh man, that's a tough one.
Just pick
You know,
one, just off the top.
you know, I'm a like Sade fan, so I feel like I have to go Sade because that's kind of what I'm usually playing. I'm just on on that kind of like mindset. I would say Sade by your side.
Okay. Any particular lyrics or you just like the song?
No, I mean, look, I think that I'm kind of a ride or die dude, and 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 I feel that the people around me, past and present, people that are living or not living, have been always by my side, and I think that's my strength. So I want to continue to give that forward, and I feel like that is what has been my success.
That is a beautiful answer, my friend. I love it. You've lived it. What a pleasure to have you on Dave of the Dead. Needless to say, this is a long overdue conversation. This
Yeah,
was
it's a
an
long one.
incredible
I appreciate.
Javier Farfan, brand growth advisor, cultural curation expert. I'm calling him the cultural oracle. My friend and colleague, an OG. Thank you for being on Dave of the Dead, brother.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Peace.
Life, business, reinvention, and the lessons that outlive us. This is the Dave of the Dead podcast.